Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of your co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going Weekly Games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. This is episode number 275, and here with me, as always, I have my two co-hosts, DBQ Hams. How you doing, DBQ?
Oh, I'm doing well. Doing well. So glad to be back. Thanks for letting me rest up last week after an injury. So nice to be here to talk about stuff.
Well, we had to put you on injured reserve, bring up a couple guys from the minor leagues, and, that's baseball.
Fair enough. Call up a couple people from the practice squad. It works out just fine, right? Yeah.
And here off sabbatical for 1 week is the fourth horseman of the apocalypse, Mr. Swissguard. How you doing, Swiss?
Good. It's always fun to talk games with you gentlemen.
That it is, and we have quite a doozy to get through tonight. So without much further ado, let's get to it. And Swiss, we will start with you. Segment 1, our main gaming experience stories. You've been playing a game that I think DBQ, you and I have both reported out on, at least the first few hours of gameplay.
No, you've been playing it. I was not here last week, so I didn't get a chance to report out. So I will be interested in Swiss's comments, and it's a rare case that three hosts are playing the same game. So
That it is.
Yeah, it's Fire Emblem Engage for the Nintendo Switch. I played it a little before I listened to Game Logic's comments, and typically I don't like listening to reviews or anything before I play a game, so kind of I can kind of form my own impressions. But the first thing that I want to get out of the way, because it's been irritating me since they announced the game, is the use of Helvetica font in the logo, which I can't stand. When companies, they're always like, oh, we're like new and the now or whatever. It's like so strained and pained to appear like modern when you use a Helvetica font, and it drives me absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a person who does not want to read or listen to reviews in case his perceptions may be swayed, but the font style, stand back.
Yeah.
That's a judgment call right there.
All right, it's been bothering me, and I had to get that off my chest. So moving on to the game. I think I think my impressions kind of actually dovetailed a bit with Game Logics from last week, in that I don't think it's going to reach what Fire Emblem Three Houses accomplished, and there's just something about it. A couple of things that I noted, like I know Game Logic, you were talking about like the colors and the palette and everything, and it's very vibrant. The anime designs are quintessential anime, RPG Fire Emblem designs. That's all fine, but I actually didn't. I felt that they were relying on like the pre-rendered like backgrounds too much. It almost made the game feel cheaper. I know that there was some of that in Three Houses, but it still felt like it didn't feel like they pushed it as much, and it still felt like there was areas to explore. Right out of the gate, Fire Emblem, it just feels like some talking heads over some pre-rendered scenes, and it just felt less than AAA quality.
So do you mean that from you feel like they didn't push the artistic envelope enough, or do you feel like they didn't push the graphical fidelity envelope enough?
The pre-rendered scenes are pretty. Like, they did a good job. Like, the artist did a good job. I just felt like in like a game of this like IP level, it feels like, it felt a little indie. I guess you could say. And more so than I was expecting.
And there you have the trappings of the Nintendo Switch hardware. You're right.
But it's a strategy RPG, so I'm not gonna like let them use that as a crutch. But the and even like some of like the after battle areas where you're supposed to be able to go around and pick up some, I think you called it the loot area. It's very, very limited. and there's plenty of other Nintendo Switch examples that it feels lazy to me rather than limited. So the other thing, I guess, like the big idea in it is utilizing the emblems, which at least Marth I know is from I'm not like a huge Fire Emblem nerd, but I've played a few of the games and I recognize Marth from Super Smash Brothers. And they talk about they're from other worlds, so I'm assuming that some of the other characters are from other Fire Emblem series. That felt like that's supposed to be like the big strategic hook, and I don't know if the cooperation between the main character and like their emblems will evolve over time. I guess as you switch the rings out, you can get the different characters, and that affects your abilities. It feels like a lesser version of Fire Emblem Awakening, where you can utilize like multiple characters, and then when you get them positioned together on the battlefield, they can do special things together. And then as you build up the relationships in like the dialogue and stuff in between the missions, and like that improves how they can interact. But I feel like with Fire Emblem Engage, the fact that it's more just like equipping, you're equipping a gem to your like your armor or something, is like a Diablo whatever way of thinking about it. That's how it felt like to me. They're just equipment that
and I think of them almost as like a special attack, because I've been
yeah,
I've been hesitant to use them because I don't know how frequently they refill.
right.
And I don't know that that's communicated well, except for like the pools that you stand on in the battlefield. And so I think you're right in some ways. Like it's lessened because it feels like something off to the side versus kind of central to the battle.
Right. You with Awakening, you had that strategic, like I can utilize them independently, or I can try to like bring them together. Like it felt like
But
you were
Awakening, right? Like the benefit of the strategic piece in Awakening was that you knew who had the higher rank, and so you were trying to move them in parallel so that you kept them together, right? There was a whole different strategic piece to that, where I think one of the things that I'm finding with the emblems is once I've gotten others besides Marth that have like the movement ability or some other pieces, like that does change the way that I think about how I get across and position myself on the chessboard versus just being a special attack.
I haven't gotten far enough yet to experiment with others beyond Marth, so I've only really seen Marth. But my initial, I don't know, it just so you finding that like satisfying, like from a strategic level?
I don't know that I would call it sad, because again, right? Like I still don't know how frequently. Like if I knew that every 3 moves they recharged, it would be a whole lot more satisfying because I could plan for it. Where I don't know that I have a clear sense. Like there is a bar on the bottom of that filling up of the engage meter, but I've got 3, maybe 4 at this point, uh, and yes, they do add a little bit more in terms of what Marth does. Marth feels very kind of introductory, but I still don't feel that. I still find myself relying more on the classic weapons triangle than anything else.
And I'll wrap up my comments and just kind of like open it up for as far as like the story. I enjoyed the Three Houses characters and the story. Like at least at the intro, was more interesting to me than a fantasy trope of waking up and being amnesia and the hero of legend or whatever you want to call it. And oh, there's a big bad guy that's rising up. I got to collect all the MacGuffins and go. So,
So,
um,
go ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say I don't want to say that it's like it's not like a terrible game. It was just I had higher expectations coming off of Three Houses.
So this game is undeniably smaller in scale, and that is deliberate and intentional. And I don't know I don't know what the plan is, right, for the franchise. I think until Three Houses, there was never a plan, right? I feel like that studio is evolving to a point of having a plan in very similar fashion to what Ubisoft is doing with the Assassin's Creed franchise, right? Assassin's Creed. Yes, Assassin's Creed. Okay. For some reason, I was thinking that I said Apollo Creed. Probably that was set off by DBQ writing not Forspoken tonight, but Forsaken, which I then had dropped into the title and then caught, and I was like, wait, did I translate it? No, DBQ put that in there. So
Yeah, I know I was wrong there. Right. Like, yes. Well, it's just really that Philly won and is going to the Super Bowl. So of course you've got some Rocky callbacks. So nice. I appreciate that.
But I feel like that. I feel like in similar vein, Ubisoft is taking Assassin's Creed, and what set that off was finally a recognition by them that they had a multifaceted, a great market demographic that were all interested in Assassin's Creed as an IP, but liked different variants, right, of Assassin's Creed. And I feel like this studio realized that they caught lightning in a bottle with Fire Emblem Three Houses, but has planned and said deliberately, we do not want to do Three Houses every single time. We don't want to turn this into Harry Potter forever and have every single Fire Emblem game. And I think that there's a recognition that there were elements of that didn't appeal to everyone and all Fire Emblem fans. This is a game that is much tighter in its application of the strategic and tactical, but by the same token, they're also keeping those elements, even in the strategy piece, like constrained and limited. It's very much like an enhanced game of chess, and I don't know that it stretches too far beyond that. But I do know that I feel like that's deliberate. And at the end of the day, it's a less than game than the sprawl of Three Houses. But I feel so far I feel like that's deliberately so. So I don't know. I mean, it's funny because we're about to talk about another franchise that has different variants where there may be people who like certain variants of it. And there was a time when those variations were advertised, right? There were segmented themes of the franchise, and you could say, okay, so I'm going to play these styles of the franchise, but not those styles of the franchise. Do you think that, and I don't know I forget what the name of the studio is because I'm horrible at tracking Nintendo first party studios. Do you think that would make it more appealing? Like the Dirt Rally series. Well, now of course they've collapsed that. The Dirt Rally series used to have Dirt, and it used to have Dirt Rally, and you knew Dirt Rally was more of the sim type of racing game, and Dirt was more of the kind of stunt car Forza Horizon kind of style game. If they got to that type of segmentation, would that keep you interested in Fire Emblem, or?
I think it would make it more helpful. So the studio's intelligent systems, but as you discussed that, it kind of made me think back. Like, so there's two primarily Fire. I think I've played like probably 3 Fire Emblem games in some form or fashion. Awakening and Three Houses have been the two that like really stuck with me. But this reminds me kind of like, we're on episode 275, so we've been doing this a while. But I remember back before the Switch, we had these discussions about what does the Switch mean for the Nintendo 3DS. And then this very much feels like Three Houses would have been the big Nintendo console iteration, and Engage would have been the 3DS handheld iteration. And then that would have been built in, and like now we don't have that distinction anymore. So that's kind of interesting to think like is there some way that they could flag that, like, hey, this is a for fans, this will tide you over to like the next major Fire Emblem release.
Right. The difference between the relational Fire Emblem and the strategic Fire Emblem, that you had Awakenings was very much a relational Fire Emblem, which is, what saved the franchise, as many people have alluded to. You get Birthright on the 3DS, or Fates on the 3DS, where you get Birthright and Conquest, where one is more relational and one is more strategic. It already divided it in that way. I think it's interesting, or I found my play experience with Engage interesting, is because simultaneously I've been going back to Three Houses. Like, I played maybe a little bit in Three Houses, but I have invested probably 6 hours in Three Houses and another 8 to 10. I'm on chapter 6 in Engage over the last few weeks. That's what happens when you're laid up for a back, or you're waiting at an auto shop for multiple vehicle repairs. You can play a lot of the Switch. But I have found myself disappointed, or not even disappointed, but disgruntled with Three Houses, of running around through the big campus where Engage is so much tighter. Like, yeah, I could talk to a few people, but it really doesn't matter, because you're not going to marry any of them. And you might get a few buffs here and there, but it doesn't, let's move on to the next chess battle. And I think at the same time, like, what I miss is that emotional connection that you do get with Three Houses, with Awakenings. Like, you do get that. And here it is it is surface level, but I find the strategicness of the gameplay stronger after 6 chapters than I have an equal amount of time in Three Houses. And I think you're right though, Swiss, right? Like, it'd be nice if there was a way to flag that, or the next game is actually combining these together, that you do get the relational aspects and a harder strategic piece. That I think one of the knocks on Three Houses over time has been, as you progress through that game, you become kind of god tier and just kind of steamroll over people, that you really are playing it for the relations more than playing it for the combat. And so I think that this is a very deliberate choice by Intelligent Systems of pushing away from that and making the combat a little bit different. But it'll be interesting to see if they could, if there's the capacity to merge those together, that you can get that emotional investment with also this kind of the strategic engagement as well.
It's funny as both of you mentioned that, because again, further down in our agenda, we'll be talking about a game that gives you lots of things to do, and that there are lots of complaints in the gaming community about games that give you too many things to do, and whether or not all of those things are impactful or not. So anything else, gentlemen, on Fire Emblem Engage?
I think DB's comments are going to help me orient myself when I play, and that might, affect how I enjoy the game moving forward.
Well, the other thing I meant to say is, as you said that piece in your segment, is it also resounds with me for another game that's kind of of that ilk that both you and I have played, was Square Enix's Dungeon Encounters. Right, whereas a very kind of simplified, dressed down, straight up approach where you were able to focus more so on very hyper specific elements that didn't include, all the trappings that are normally in a Square Enix game. And then that's the question, right? Did you, would you enjoy that smaller experience? So interesting. Talking about experiences that highly vary over the course of a long-lived franchise, I have been playing Need for Speed Unbound on the Xbox Series X, and so, my feelings, very similar to Swiss on Fire Emblem Engage, are very mixed on Need for Speed Unbound. My feelings are, it's a serviceable installment of the Need for Speed franchise. I give props to Criterion that it is not more Burnout. That was my biggest concern going into the game. However, the game feels like a very small iteration on Heat. Lakeshore does not feel super highly differentiated from Palm City. In fact, to the point where when you leave Rydell's Rides, that departure vector almost feels like exactly pulling out of Lucas's garage in Need for Speed Heat.
I think the fact that you can name both of those is pretty impressive because I mean, I would think the Venn diagram of Need for Speed fans and the universe is probably relatively small. So I think that I don't disagree with you because I can remember like it does. You're taking that same kind of, it's a sharp turn, like the map layout feels relatively similar.
It does. It does. And I mean, and the longer the series goes on, like, Fairhaven, Rockport, Palm City, Lakeshore, like they all start to just kind of blend together. Whereas I feel like, way back in the day, it felt like they were more highly differentiated. The cops, right, as the franchise, and we talked about this in Swiss's section. Sorry about the might be a little scratch in there. I feel like the cops now kind of have a persona, and I kind of feel like when they mix and meld. I talked a little bit about how this franchise was differentiated before, and there was a time when EA said, "Look, we're gonna have a over the course of Need for Speed, each year you're gonna see a different kind of installment, but the installments will be like packages. Like you're gonna have a Hot Pursuit style Need for Speed, you're gonna have a Most Wanted style Need for Speed, we're gonna have an Underground style Need for Speed." And each of those will have the essential elements of those chapters, right? But over time, they've all just kind of merged and muddled into this thing that is, I guess, probably a Most Wanted, right, style, where you have Hot Pursuit and you have elements of Hot Pursuit, but not as super intense as Hot Pursuit is, right, in the cop chases. They're kind of an ancillary activity on top of the Hot Pursuit style, whereas Hot Pursuit is like the main course in a lot of sections.
How many levels of Cop Pursuit have you gotten to at this point?
I'm still in the early stages, so I guess it progresses to like 6, 7, or 8 like fire levels. So I'm just in like the first couple.
Yeah, no, I asked because like as you progress through, right, you get the difference of like an armored vehicle that can ram you, and then helicopters coming, and that you do get a little bit. It does add a little bit different, but I think you're right. Like it does, in terms of the differentiation, it is just a blender versus a partition.
Well, right, and I mean, and I hate to emphasize, or to, nod my head in the direction of emphasis on like story and character development and whatnot, but like at least so far, there are no distinctive like cop personalities. Maybe those come into the story at some point, but whereas Heat and Most Wanted, like the original Most Wanted, right, the one with the black Mustang on the cover, the 2005 version, not like the imposter version that came out like 10 years later or whatever.
The Criterion version,
right. But in those cases, like the cops were actually like, and I mean the full motion video stuff was always just kind of cheesy. But the point was they were characters in the story, right? Whereas you don't have that; they're just all just kind of vapid NPCs. I will say the cop AI in this that I've experienced is in some ways more aggressive, maybe almost seems like more intelligent. In one race, they came flying onto the track they were like jumping off of like elevated parts of the track, and they were taking there were lower altitude approaches that kind of put them on the hill, and they were racing up the hill and then like jumping and leaping onto the track. So all of that does give you some kind of spectacular visuals. There's much more emphasis on story in this version than some past versions have, even where like the story was just kind of a loose framework or kind of window dressing. But like the character development, even in the first couple hours, is more. And I'm not saying it's good. It's still campy. It's still very, very, very much a Fast and Furious kind of knockoff. But but the amount of time that is spent, the lines of scripting and dialogue is more so, I feel like, than you've had in past series. But like I said, at the end of the day, I think my biggest, I hate to term it a disappointment. My biggest disappointment is it's just a very small iteration upon the Heat formula. It's not even Rivals, which I felt like had its own kind of unique kind of assembly of an approach to Need for Speed, and the driving doesn't feel anymore. I mean, the physics model feels like it's the same physics model as Heat. So will this be entertaining? Yes, in an iterative Assassin's Creed kind of way, where, in an annualized release, you just shift locations, it's kind of what it feels like. And I'm not saying this is annualized, but, when Assassin's Creed was annualized, the cell shading makes a little bit of a difference. The sparklies coming off the cars, they're neat. I mean, they're neat. They're not, a lot of people felt like they was gonna kind of make them vomit. It's neat to see those effects when you make like a really big jump. I do feel like there are more aerial instances in this city than some other iterations of Need for Speed, at least in the early goings. But it is what it is. It should provide some enjoyment, but I don't feel like it moves the needle for the series. I still feel like the series is, at the end of the day, kind of still searching for its identity in terms of where it wants to go, right? It's evolutionary identity. Right now, it's just kind of marking time and repeating things that have been done before in a very kind of formulaic fashion with some minor tweaks. But, it's a solid racer. I'm sure it'll be enjoyable, but I just don't feel like it's gonna, it still leaves me hungering for what is next for Need for Speed.
I think that's a really, I think it's a good observation, because the way that I came out of it, and I've still kind of come back to it over time, and actually my son and I have been playing it over the course of our 10-hour trial, is it's a lot of fun. It isn't necessarily anything new. It's just that it's been a while since we've played something like this, right? Like, you're right. In terms of Heat, it's not drastically different than Heat, other than like a little bit of the shell shading. There we go. She shells. But other than that, it's kind of the same concept. The map is a little bit, it's a little more constricted, but at the same time, it's still very similar. And I think it is just a simple matter of, it's been a long time since we've played something like this that makes it feel enjoyable versus the annualization of things. But I agree. It's fine. I don't know that it carves out and creates its own identity. And I think that's a challenge for Need for Speed at this point. And it's been a challenge, unfortunately, for a number of years.
Well, my feeling is although I'm sitting here saying, well, I wish they would kind of chart new territory, I'm also fine if they dip further back into the catalog, right? Like, not a ton of people, other than, like you said, right, the cross section is fairly small. Not a ton of people other than me remember things like Need for Speed 2, High Stakes, Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed, Need for Speed, if you go back to the early, I mentioned that Most Wanted variant, before Criterion came on the scene. Not a lot of people remember those games. And Rivals had some very neat approaches to it.
I was thinking even on Rivals, they haven't really gone back to that, well, and granted, I'm going to take a moment and say, granted, in American culture at this point in time, taking a cop versus pedestrian aspect to a video game carries a lot of other context to it than it culturally did, even if it isn't necessarily any less relevant than it was. Culturally, we are more aware of some of those conditions and the situations that come with police. And so I can see where Rivals are coming back to that, cop versus pursuant. It creates a potential, but it was a different dynamic, right? From a purely gameplay specific piece, it was something different. and it had its own identity.
Yeah, and like I said, they, I would be totally open to them, not keeping the cops in. Like Need for Speed High Stakes didn't have cops in it. Porsche Unleashed didn't have cops in it. And so you'd be free, and for people who don't remember those games, like Need for Speed High Stakes was like a super focus on exotics in European cars. Porsche Unleashed was a hyper focus on, the long. You could definitely do. There's no reason why you couldn't do a Need for Speed Ferrari Unleashed, right? So these long, venerable lines of cars that, from a survey sim perspective, and that's the thing too, right? Is those things were skated much closer towards the survey sim end of the spectrum, and understood, maybe they wouldn't be as appealing to kind of the casual crowd, but where we are with Need for Speed now, who cares? Like, I don't know that that's super impactful, right? If you don't have that type of appeal, so you know. They'll figure some things out. They're cross pollinating with Codemasters. Maybe that'll be some things. And I know, and I hear like the racing game naysayers in the back of my head, as I've been talking on this, and they'll say, well, what else do you do in a racing game? They're boring anyway. There's not a lot of, like, no, but the F1 series has iterated on what it does, right? It's that F1 today is a radically different game than it was, in even 2013. And on top of that, you have rule changes in F1 itself that cause, a significant amount of difference in kind of how you approach races and the tracks. Dirt has evolved, right? Like I said, you have the rally series versus the dirt series. They took that 1 year to branch off into Gymkhana, right, and incorporating that into the game. So racing games have taken different vectors that cause changes. And even if they cycle those, right, they're cycling them in a way that provides greater variation than we're seeing out of the Need for Speed franchise. So I don't know. Any questions? I know DBQ, you've played it, so you've probably seen much of the same thing that I've seen.
Yeah, again, it's enjoyable, but it isn't necessarily moving the needle one way or the other.
All right, well, let's get on to the main title event that I'm sure a lot of listeners are looking forward to. DBQ's report out on Forspoken to start us off with, and then following that will be the report out on HiFi Rush as well, which I know a lot of people are looking forward to.
Okay, for the sake of time, I'm going to quickly go through this because if you're following games media at this point, Forspoken has gotten plenty of crap. Like, I don't know that it's not deserved, but I don't think that it's necessarily earned as well. So here's what I'll say about Forspoken: that it is just a game. It is a middle of the road type of game. Like, it is not anything that you're pinning your hopes on, nor is it busted and broken. It is mediocre to the point where in some ways, I think that from Games Press, like, it is easier to critique a broken game because there's hopes that it's going to get better than the pile on that we've seen on Forspoken in terms of, it's just a it's a C. It's a D plus C minus, C. It's not necessarily broken. It plays pretty well, but unfortunately, I guess that what that means is it's shipped in a really good state, but it doesn't have any hope of getting a whole lot better because structurally, it is what it is. And I'll say all this with 4 hours in, and maybe as reading reviews and kind of projecting out my experience onto 20 plus hours of gameplay, okay, I could see where it gets tiresome. But I came at it, I guess I came at it expecting the worst, and I was pleasantly surprised, like, oh, this isn't so bad. Like, it's kind of enjoyable. It's not like it's a great story. It feels very much of a early PlayStation 4 generation. It is not moving the needle in terms of narrative. It is not moving the needle in terms of animation, motion capture aspects, but it is interesting. The magic aspect does feel pretty much like shooting a gun. You have a shotgun and you have a rapid fire pistol, and you have some defensive and kind of status attacks in magic, which work pretty well, and they're called up on you're either using your left trigger or your right trigger, and that works. But in terms of, it doesn't feel, I think it'll be interesting to see when Hogwarts Legacy comes out and you have two different magic games relatively close. Like you are just pulling the right trigger to shoot off your magic attack. I think the most fun aspect of this is the transversal, the kind of magic parkour that goes on and the speed that comes with it. The art style is kind of interesting. Like it's not great. Like it is kind of medieval, but also I think one of the there's a couple articles over the last week, like once the reviews got out and people kind of spent a little more time with it, like there are some anime aspects in this, even if it is supposed to be grounded in New York kind of street as you're an orphan. It's kind of enjoyable. I again, it's not a $70 game, but if this is a B tier game, and it does a lot of things perfectly adequate, but I think there are so many times in the last 5 years that Square has struggled with figuring out how to really nail the presentation, and whether that's through its Western studios with Crystal Dynamics or some of its own studios in Japan. I feel like this is definitely in that vein of like it's trying and it's earnest, but it is not necessarily anything it's a good filler game. And that's kind of where I'm at with it. Like I'm enjoying it. I'm more interested than I thought I would be, but it's also I also completely see that it is not necessarily a great game. It's just moderate.
Well, I mean, you bring up an interesting point that hasn't really been discussed and hasn't really been applied in the lens that people see this game through, I think, and that's that this is a Japanese studio, and so no, I don't want to say, and I mean it's not an excuse, but it should be understood much in the same way that the guy who's the creator of Cowboy Bebop, right, had a recent interview this week, and he talked about, Netflix brought him in and showed him like the introductory scene of the live action version, and he's like, based on, I think he said it like the opening scene was like a casino, and like from that moment, which is literally the first time the camera lens aperture opens, right? He's like, I struggled to like pay attention to like that. Like that immediately told me that it was not Cowboy Bebop. And so there should be a level of sophistication in viewing the art form that is games, in recognizing this is a different culture trying to tell a story in a Western culture, right, environment, at least in its opening scenes. And we have to train ourselves to kind of be forgiving when you're experiencing a JRPG, right? And those of us who can't obviously have the problem with onboarding into JRPGs, as I do, right? But I recognize that as a me problem. That is not on the Japanese developer. They're representing things through an Eastern world view, and none of that descriptive text is around any of the commentary on Forspoken that I've seen at all. It's all just been, oh, this is awkward. All the dialogue is this, blah 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 blah. And I'm like, do do you understand that like you would you should expect that depiction to be pretty much the same as a JRPG? You
Well,
know?
and I think I think that's a very good point. And the JRPG comparison is spot on, because I was thinking this the other day when I was playing it, is just like a JRPG, it's got a long onboarding process. Like, you better be prepared for some cutscenes and some exposition and a little bit of walking until the next cutscene. But once you get through that and you get into the mythical, magical land, like, all that Eastern Western context goes out the window, or at least should, because you're thrown into a different world. You're thrown into something that is unique. And yeah, sure, there's still quips going on here and there, but I can't, I'm so surprised, like, that I feel myself defending this game. Like, it's not as bad as I expected. And I really think, like, well, I think it'll be interesting. Like, it'll be interesting to come back over the course of the year and what the release calendar looks like. Like, it is a very functional game. In all the games that have broken, been broken at launch and somewhat suspect or needing multiple patches, this is a game that is relatively tight in scope. It's not trying to have a multiplayer aspect or a co-op aspect. It is just a single player experience. And it's not going to win any awards, but it's also and it's also a perfectly fine video game, right? I say this as somebody who has been playing video games just for the sake of a game, rather than, like, it doesn't have to make me feel anything. It doesn't have to be an emotional or artistic experience. It can just be kind of a game. And
It doesn't have to be judged on the Game of the Year yardstick.
yeah, right. Like, when this goes on sale for $40 or $30, people will find a lot to. It'll be interesting to see if there's like a second wave of dialogue and discourse about this. Like, it's not great, but it's not. There's a lot worse things out there, and a lot worse that have been released over the last couple of years.
It's you guys, as you guys have been having this discussion, there's been a few things that it feels like you're describing. Like, I heard that it wasn't great, but I haven't gotten into the details on why. But it feels like what you're describing is what we would call like a summer popcorn flick of a movie, right? Like, you don't expect it to win an Oscar. You're not trying. It's not.
I'd put it more as like, we're going to release this in January or March and
Okay.
bury it, because it's okay, but we don't want a whole lot of spotlight on it.
Gotcha.
Right? Like, it is not a roller coaster ride popcorn flick. It's a perfectly fine. There's a really interesting article on Polygon over the course of this last week that talks about how earnest and serious some of the narrative is in this, where the main character is a little more quippy. And so there is kind of a dichotomy there. So it's not necessarily a big kind of action movie ride. It's more of it's an art piece that is trying to aspire to something more.
Do you think if the publisher wasn't Square Enix, people wouldn't be as harsh on it?
Yes. Right? I think, oh sure. Like, if this was just released from the studio that actually did the game versus being published by Square, I think that it would be an interesting project, and people would be talking about what they do next versus kind of the dialogue that's been around the limitations of this game as a Square game.
I mean, and my feelings are, I don't know that it would be less harshly criticized. My thing is, I feel like the root around this is, and here's the problem with gamers and what we're doing to the industry, right? First of all, we've lost the mission on what a high 60s, low 70s game is, right? Those are games that are considered decent games. They're considered things that fans of specific genres will be fine with. This is the ratchet that I sometimes have to do with flight sims, right, or racing games, right, who kind of get, in my opinion, reviewed not as favorably because what's in the zeitgeist is story-driven cinematic narrative games, right? And so I have to recalibrate what I'm looking for when I consider review scores, right? When I'm looking for games of that genre. But the second thing is the thing that I mentioned before, which is like right now today, particularly because this is a PlayStation exclusive, everything gets regarded against the Game of the Year yardstick. And I'm like, please understand that whether you like stacked rankings or not, right, as the guy from Blizzard chose to lose his job this week instead of, do stacked ranking, whether you like them or not, stacked rankings are actually a natural statistical outcome of the human race, right? Or just anything mathematically, right? You should expect that the vast majority of games, and first of all, the vast majority of games don't even break even, right, from a revenue perspective. You get 10,000 games published to Steam every year, right? You should expect that the vast majority of games are going to fall kind of in this score range, right? In the high 60s to low 70s. And that what we're accustomed to being in the zeitgeist and discussing are really the upper crust of video games, right? In that A-B range. And so we need to understand that games like Forspoken have to exist in order for the higher percentage games, right, to have any significance or relevance. If there were, and as it is, their games, I mean, and I'm just going to put this in review score perspective just to kind of make the math make sense. Again, I go back to, there are somewhere along the lines of 240 to 300, right, 80 or above games published every year, right, across all of the platforms. That is more than any gamer could possibly play in a year. And so, again, there should be a natural mathematical expectation that games like Forspoken are going to exist. There should be, again, I go back to what I mentioned about, JRPGs, the dialogue, Eastern, right, development studio, not entirely different than Zelda, right, or some of the other kind of Eastern, properties that we've been exposed to. And those obviously have a very starkly different dialogue take, plot take than, Skyrim, Oblivion, Dragon Age, right? Things that have been published by Western studios. So, and all of that is not to say that Forspoken should be considered for Game of the Year. It shouldn't, right? It doesn't really cut that grade. It doesn't cut a grade that makes me interested in go playing it, even if it lands in a subscription service someday, right? But what we do is we take games that fall in this review range and we drag them, right, as if they are complete failures. And so what publishers do is they hear that and they go, oh, what we need to do is ratchet our game up. Everything's got to be AAA. Everything's got to be Michael Bay. And then you wonder why production costs are increasing, why it becomes much more difficult. And this is Square Enix. This is one of the largest publishers with one of the widest portfolios of IP with some of the most successful games. This is a publisher that takes their time to release a Final Fantasy game and delays it ad nauseum and doesn't care because they know, hey, we can delay it for 8 years and people are still going to buy it, right? So if you want Square Enix to do nothing but Final Fantasy because that's the only thing that makes money and that's the only thing that gamers have any regard for, and anything that's less than the best Final Fantasy game, which is an incredibly high bar, right, is unacceptable by the gaming community, then, I mean, get used to paying $80, $90, $100 for games because that's what's going to wind up coming down the pike. So...
yeah, I think all that is a really excellent point. I find it interesting, the Final Fantasy comparison, because Luminous Studios or Luminous Productions was many of the key players there are in Final Fantasy 15. So, and there's actually some movement comparisons, like the way that both the main characters move throughout the battlefield and throughout the landscape definitely has some similarities in terms of the engine, or at least the framework that they're using. I will also say I'm playing this through GameFly, so thank you, GameFly, for giving me $1 for a month so I could try out a game like this, because you know, I'll look for it on sale. It's not, again, not something that I'm going to pay full price for, but by the nature of experiencing it, I've walked away more uh, more looking forward to it than I expected, given the discourse.
Okay, so were your impressions of Hi-Fi Rush better than Forspoken?
Oh, Hi-Fi Rush! Talking about a game that drops with no discourse. Hi-Fi Rush was the one that came out of the Bethesda Microsoft Direct, and it is a shadow drop that came out. It is by the Evil Within studio, the Ghostwire Tokyo studio. That it is fun. If you like rhythm games, yes, it is good. It's a third-person combat. Um, if you think of it, you need to think of it like a rhythm game, because I approached it like a third person action game with rhythm combat. And at first I found myself really like, why can't I move faster? I should be flowing. The way that the combat flows is so smooth that I should be moving through the landscape faster, more like a Sunset Overdrive, more like Spider-Man. I should be moving in this kind of pulsating way that the soundtrack of the game moves. And then I realized, oh, I am running to the beat of the game, like of the soundtrack. Every step is part of the beat. And so there is so much here that keeps you on the beat. And also then your heavy attack is like on the second beat. Like there is a pause in between, there's a rest in between. Like there is some nice musical things going on with it. The art style feels like, again, this is not a AAA game. But it is charming as all heck. If you have any connection with kind of, Saturday morning cartoons, Cartoon Network 2000s cartoons, like it's a cartoony type of game, but it's got this kind of the rhythm combat is excellent. Like it is for a game that just kind of comes out of nowhere without any build up, without any hype. There's a lot to love here. It's a lot of fun. I was playing it. My son and I both played it. I watched him play it for a while. I played it for some. It had a constant smile on my face as I was playing it. So it's a really refreshing type of, again, a game that has no ambitions about what it is besides just being a fun game, and does well at that.
No, and it lends strength to the marketing notion of shadow dropping. My commentary on this game is, had this game, there were lots of commentary. They're like, Xbox should have like announced this at the Game Awards, right? That would have made up for what everybody felt was a kind of cowardly, entry into the Game Awards when all other publishers and other platforms, were at least advertising some notion of a game. Microsoft just kind of took a whiff. But my counter to that is, had this game been announced at the Game Awards, it would have gotten dragged for a month or 2 months. It would have been heavily criticized. And it's because it's a rhythm game. It's niche. Metal Hellslinger came out, and hardly anyone that I know of played it in any significance. Didn't get a lot of buzz. But games of this nature, and I can't remember the shooter. I can't remember the rhythm-based shooter.
There was Soundfall that came out earlier this year.
Okay.
Which was kind of an action RPG, but in a rhythm-based piece as well.
Yeah. And there have been a handful of other indies, that aren't necessarily rhythm-based, like Boomerang and Dust, Redneck Rampage. But, some other things that, as we were talking about Forspoken, right, cut underneath the notion by a wide margin of what AAA is. And so games of that nature just get criticized, right, until they land. And so a way to avoid all of that is to do what Microsoft did with this game and just shadow drop it. Incredibly effective marketing technique, in my opinion, because in particular today, anything that is a console exclusive is just gonna attract a lot of flies. and has the chance to be torpedoed in public opinion, much more so than a game that's cross-platform. So, good playing of the chess game, in my opinion. Swiss, any comments on HiFi Rush or questions?
It looks cool. I mean, how I've not played many rhythm games. I want to get the Crypt of the Necrodancer.
Necrodancer, yep, the Zelda DLC. Yeah, there's actually some similarities there where in Crypt of the Necrodancer, you're moving on the beat. And so it ends up like you see that rhythm pulsing on the screen, or there's a track going through. Here, that's there and it helps you, but it's not necessary. I think the piece where the rhythm piece comes in is once you start attacking, you get almost like Elite Beat Agents, where you get the circle that starts to close on the other circle and you have to hit it as they line up. Like you get that type of visual connotation for when to time your attack. And so it's forgiving to some degree, but it's also instructive. Like it does a lot with its visual vocabulary to help you understand how to stay on the beat. And again, it doesn't necessarily, you're not going to necessarily die if you miss the beat. You're just not going to have as powerful of an attack. And so there's in that same aspect of, yeah, you could still keep kind of going, but you're going to struggle a little bit more. And so, yeah, I could see it, it's going to be out on PC. It's a lot of fun. It would work on any console, really. It's just a very enjoyable, small little game.
All right, DBQ, well, why don't you go ahead and carry us on into segment 2, and let's bull rush through the news headlines since we have a lot of...
Okay, I'm not going to spend long on this one because it was announced last week, but I was not here, so I just want to say Marvel's Avengers, no surprise, ending support in March. Again, not a small game in all the middling games that we've been talking about. A game that was anticipated to be AAA and that really is had some struggles to it. But I do want to say that good on the developers and Crystal Dynamics of opening up all the cosmetics once the final update comes out in March. That, granted, I say this as somebody who just spent some money on it over the holiday season in a show of support to pick up the cell shaded. There we go. I'll get it eventually. Captain America, which is actually kind of fun, but all of the cosmetic costumes, whether they're MCU or anything else, are going to be free for everybody come the middle of March in the final update. So it's nice of the developers to kind of just open it up and let people play the game that they made. And as we've talked about on this podcast, not only was it my disappointing game of that year, but it's also one of my favorite stories of that year as well. And so the single player aspect is still well worth it. So there's my pouring one out for Marvel's Avengers.
And in other Marvel IP news, XCOM director says no plans for the series while he's still working on Midnight Suns DLC. This story over on Shack News. Jake Solomon, and I quote, Jake Solomon shared in a recent interview that he has no information about XCOM for the time being while there's still Midnight Suns content in the works. Marvel's Midnight Suns was a surprisingly solid take on both the Marvel Universe and strategy gaming, and it looks like Firaxis Games' main priority while there's still DLC to do. In a recent interview regarding the game, director Jake Solomon was asked about the XCOM series, having also directed XCOM Enemy Unknown and XCOM 2. However, he said there's no news to share, and there probably won't be from him while he's working on Midnight Suns post-launch content. What I reckon is that post-launch content will probably dribble-drabble out over the next 12 to 18 months, and then it will probably most certainly be time for that studio to turn back to XCOM, because we know 2K does love to iterate on its IP, and we're even getting the next evolution of BioShock here. So I don't know why XCOM would go away, and Firaxis is a turn-based strategy studio. So what else are they going to do? Next story in the rundown is Elden Ring and Stray are tied for this year's Game Developers Choice Awards. This story over on Game Industry Biz, my favorite gaming news website, the only gaming news website that I can really give credit for almost getting everything right in terms of accuracy and not.
Yeah, they source it pretty well. Yeah. Yes.
And I quote this story from Jeffrey Rousseau. The 2 titles are up for 6 categories, while God of War Ragnarok is up for 5 awards. Game Developers Conference organizers Informatech have unveiled the finalists for this year's Game Developers Choice Awards. And, the usual suspects are in there. Game of the Year category includes Elden Ring, God of War Ragnarok, Immortality, Pentiment, Obsidian scoring a nod here, as in keeping with their reputation for being one of the best studios out there. Stray and Tunic gets a nod in the GOTY category. Plenty of other categories here for the GDCs, much as we mentioned during the DICE Awards. Stop only paying attention to the Game Awards. That is a marketing show. It is just meant to drive sales before Christmas. Stop getting wrapped around the axle about it, having your feelings hurt, getting your emotions all in a twist. If you really want to pay attention to, how people are viewing the art form of games, look at the DICE Awards and look at GDC.
Yeah, I would agree, right? Looking at the best debut category, Neon White, Norco, Stray, Tunic, and Vampire Survivors, all great kind of mid-tier games, not a AAA studio, but again, really solid gameplay experiences. And it's nice to have this just like we did with DICE, where we ran through a whole lot of these. There's a lot of good out there that doesn't necessarily have a multi-million-dollar marketing budget attached to it.
Oh, DBQ, you can go ahead and proceed with the Xbox numbers. Sorry.
All right. So, sorry. No, I was just keeping going through the list. Is there anything else that I missed here? But Xbox numbers here, I'm going to wrap this into my next piece as well. So, again, we're over at Games Industry Biz. Q2 revenues are down 13%, but Game Pass has grown. And so, revenue overall is up 2% year on year. It's down about 12% in net income, but it is the Game Pass piece. And again, this shouldn't be surprising from an Xbox point of view. There have been plenty of other articles talking about how Xbox didn't have a great showing in terms of game releases, which means not a lot for sales, where most of Xbox's, a lot of Xbox's revenue has come through Game Pass, and that has been a beneficial piece to them. And so I think that's where the other news of this week of GoldenEye dropping on Xbox and Switch, we knew that GoldenEye, I don't even know if I'd call it remastered, but a GoldenEye N64 release was announced back in late fall, and we didn't necessarily have a date. And then this week we got a date that it was coming Friday. And so on Friday we got the update. Earlier this week we got the update that it was coming for Xbox on Game Pass and also on Nintendo Switch Online N64 expansion. And having played both of them, I will tell you that, I will be honest and tell you that I am probably a few too years old to appreciate the sheer gravitas of the GoldenEye college dorm room experience, because at that point I was already living in an apartment with other college roommates and missed out on the aspect of putting cardboard over our TV, our CTR screens. But I will say this, after playing both of them, Xbox plays really well. I mean, it plays what you think a first-person shooter should play as. And I think the challenge, and unfortunately the challenge has been well documented. Ars Technica, Kotaku, number of other game sites have talked about the challenging setup, the control setup for the Switch. And I have, Swiss, you are smiling at this. So I want to hear have you had a chance to play a little bit of GoldenEye as well?
I haven't, but I'm not terrible. My thought was it's probably not going to age well. So it's interesting that you said that the Xbox plays well. And then you were talking about the controls, and I was just thinking, for all the youngins out there that maybe never held an N64 controller, like, remember, it was mapped in a very different way than modern.
Right, very much so. There was not twin sticks. You had a D-pad and a stick, or you had a stick and some C buttons, right? Like it is, but it is so counterintuitive to what you are used to playing modern first-person shooter games, where the Xbox version has mapped it to what you would expect playing you've got your navigation, your movement is on your two sticks, and your right trigger, your aim down sights, and your right trigger for shoot is all kind of right in where you would expect it to be. And on the Switch, you can remap things, but even remapping them still, and Swiss, you're not wrong, right? Like the way that it was originally set up was you had movement on one axis on one set of buttons, and you had movement on another axis on a different set of buttons, and then you also had strafing movement on another set of buttons. And putting that all onto a modern console means that, yes, that is historically accurate. That doesn't make the experience any more accessible.
So are there none of those were allocated to motion controls on the Switch?
No. Oh, that would be very acceptable by me. No, it is not. Like at this point, and this is documented out there through Reddit and other sites, like you can, there are some ways that it shows you where it's mapped to, but the cleanest way to kind of work around that is to remap it at the console level. Like whether you're creating a profile for that specific game, or you are just remapping. Basically, you're almost swapping your left and right analog sticks in order to get them to move the way that other first-person shooters do. So it's a and the other disappointing thing is, like, on the Switch, I have some Power A GameCube controllers, which have the C stick. So I thought, okay, well, that should work the same way as the C buttons. No. And you can't remap it. Have a Pro controller on the Switch, can't remap it to a Pro controller. The only thing you can remap are on the Joy-Cons, and so there's it's a really limiting number of options, which is too bad, because actually as a remaster, it's done okay. Like the graphic textures looked kind of nice. Like it's still an N64 game, but other side, the biggest kind of graphical complaint is the low res text, which makes it kind of difficult to read. But the graphics and the in-game aspects, they look pretty well. Having played through the first couple levels on Xbox and trying to play it on Switch, like it looks well in handheld, looks well on a TV, 1080, 4K, even on a 4K, it looks okay. It is, you understand that the textures are flat because that's the way the game was. So it'll be interesting to see if there is any kind of post-release update for it, or this is kind of a bare bones fan service release, or if there's going to be any type of patch that comes to address some of these things.
Yeah, it's I mean, and you're talking about the college dorm. I mean, I remember with like my brother and my friend, like back when we had coax cables into our CRT, like getting a coax splitter, so we had it on two CRT TVs, and then we could, put like tape like you said, tape cardboard over them so that you couldn't see each other's like screens, and I feel like that for like that sleepover nostalgia, like 90s nostalgia aspect to it is what's appealing to me about Goldeneye. But like it's the genres come so far on consoles. Like I mean, I play pretty much, I mean, I don't play first person shooters on consoles now, just PC, but like I mean, I can still understand that game, it was special, but not because it had its moment, but it's just I'm not sure like why in 2023 like we need to see it again.
Yeah, it's special for the nostalgia aspect, and it was special at the time because it was new and different.
And on the N64 especially. So
This game sounds like one long helicopter mission in GTA Vice City, remote control helicopter. Like that's the mission that I could not complete that mission until like 2013, right? And I was able to complete it because on the NVIDIA Shield, I forget what it is, but there was like a button for you to hit to swap controller profiles, because the RC helicopter controlled radically different from your third person view. And there were points in that mission where you get fired at. And so you have to snap back, right? And so I would create another profile or remap buttons for the RC copter, but then I couldn't use that if I had to switch back to Tony. So I was only able to complete it on the NVIDIA Shield because I had a button to rapidly swap profiles. And this sounds like that level of frustration, but except the whole game.
That level, right? Like that is where I bounced off of Vice City and just drove around and took jumps and enjoyed the soundtrack. I would really be interested in any of the other hosts here trying to figure out the control scheme. Like I can't tell if it is just bad or if I don't have the muscle memory of what the N64 was to understand what the control scheme is trying to do. Like it is the Ars Technica one with Kyle Orland, who I appreciate and have appreciated for probably almost 2 decades at this point. His solution was basically to put the left Joy-Con in your right hand and put the right Joy-Con in your left hand and play it that way. So then your shooting trigger button is actually what you think it should be, and your XY axes are moving the way that you would anticipate. So, in true paste some cardboard on a CRTV fashion, this is a hacked together, cobbled together way of playing this game.
Yeah, well, you'll definitely have to rely on Tao or Swiss for to take that grenade, because like Swiss said, like I tried even going back to Destiny 2 on the Xbox like a few weeks ago, and I was like, nope, I'm done. Like I'm only playing shooters on PC, and in the same fashion, right? Halo Combat Evolved was a like seminal release on the original Xbox that 20 years later I'm like, why would anybody ever bother playing a shooter on a console? And you can, it's even at the point now where when I look at like YouTube videos, right, and live streams, I'm like, I can tell when somebody's playing with a controller, like just the way the on-screen avatar moves, and it just seems like such a drop in the fluidity of combat and movement in comparison to playing with a mouse and keyboard on PC. But that's an argument for another day. DBQ, you have also been playing another thing, which I might also think is a little antiquated in its approach to gaming, much in the same way that Goldeneye is, but you might have a different opinion.
Okay, so I don't want to. We've got lots to talk about, so I'm gonna save this for another point in time. But yes, I did. My Analogue Pocket order came through. I got a announcement that it was prepping to ship back in November, and I got another announcement at the beginning of January saying that it shipped, and it's here. And as someone who is disappointingly and fortunately enough to have a used game store, an independently owned used game store, go out of business in their town a few years back, it meant for a whole lot of grab bags of a variety of crappy license games and a few gems in there. But what it means is I now have multiple kind of stacks and bags worth of GBA, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color games, Perfect Dark on Game Boy Color, a variety of things. But so Analogue Pocket plays Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, it has one of this is the geekiness in it. One of the fun things is when you put in a cartridge, you have multiple display modes. Like you have the Analogue Pocket mode, which kind of cleans up the resolution, but then you also have like the classic GB. If you're having a GBA cart, you have the GBA mode, which looks very much. It's a little darker. It's a little more pixelated. Not pixelated, but it's not as blended together in terms of its resolution. And then you also have the SP 101, which was the brighter backlight GBA SP that came out. And so you have those modes. If you're on a Game Boy, if you're playing a Game Boy game, you have the original kind of greenish screen. You have the Game Boy Light or the Game Boy Pocket screen. You have the Game Boy Color screen. So it really does some nice things. All that said and done, in addition to that, it has a variety of cores that are released so you can legally do some emulation. That it also allows you to run some Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis games, Master System games as well on there as well. So yes, I have been playing around a little bit with the Analogue Pocket, but I will probably come back to it. But yeah, it's a dense machine. It is well constructed, solid. It's not a high-end machine in terms of what it's producing graphical, but it feels high-end in terms of kind of the quality. If you're looking to play kind of classic 90s, late 80s portable games, this is, to me, seems like the best machine to do it. It has some great aspects to it. It still has all the ability to play those original games and put them in resolutions that not only are original but also kind of are better than that, and it has all those functionality. So in terms of game preservation and history, it's a really nice machine.
Very cool. I will take the baton and continue sprinting for our last 11 minutes here. I have been revisiting Far Cry 5 on PC. And so if everybody winds the clock back, I think this is a 2018 game. I think DBQ is going to historically check for me. But I played this game a lot, but I played on PlayStation 4 at the time. I eventually got around to getting it on PC, but it was definitely well after kind of its main, launch window and zeitgeist. I have actually, one of the things that I've gotten in the last few weeks, I think I mentioned this last week, maybe I didn't, but I've actually gotten a 34-inch ultra-wide monitor for the main gaming PC, my number one gaming PC that I built a few weeks ago. And so now I've been playing a lot of games on it in 3440 by 1440p. It's a 144 hertz monitor as well, HDR. And so this is one game that supports that resolution. And having that additional 33% of peripheral vision is just great. The game, it obviously doesn't look, up to spec with current games, but the game still looks good. I don't think I would rank it up with like something like Destiny 2, which I think holds up really well over time. But there's still, this is a thing that, when you talk about art and environment and just kind of the overall aesthetic of a game, this is a game where when you're way up high at some of the highest elevation points in Hope County, Montana, kind of in that Assassin's Creed kind of way, just the panoramic vistas are just, amazing to just kind of sit there and look out at. You have a pair of binoculars, which allows you to zoom in on and find like a lot of encampments, etc. I've been up to, I think, what is the highest elevation. I ran a mission where you're trying to stop some communication towers that are being jammed. And in, there's a lot to do now in the dialogue in games about, Ubisoft style games, and, you just having too much to do. And in my opinion, that's part of playing the game, right? Is figuring out, the Ubisoft style games have a time management aspect to them. And I can understand how that would bother some people, because they approach, they seek out games as a way to avoid regular life. In my opinion, time management is a essential part of my life, and having that replicated in a game doesn't bother me that much. And as you go through Hope County, and I'm in Jacob's territory up to the north in like the White Mountains, I think they're called. You know, as I've said many times before in games like this, deciding how I'm going to play the game and what I'm going to spend my time on doing is kind of a quintessential step, right, in approaching the game. There's a ton in Far Cry 5 to distract you. You can, as you're pick any objective, and on your approach to that objective, there are going to be Peggies that you're going to randomly come across. There's going to be wildlife that you can encounter, that you can hunt. All sort. You can go after certain vehicles, etc. And so, you have to make decisions and choices about how to approach that. One of the things I've done is I've purchased a helicopter now and customized it, which I've never done before in the game. So now I'm spending a lot of my time kind of flying around, Hope County, Montana. I've also got the parachute and the wingsuit. So, in one instance, I base jumped off a point in a mountain, went into my wingsuit, was coming down, and then noticed, on two occasions, noticed hostages that were captured. And on one occasion, zip lined in, rescued the hostage. And then as she was talking to me, I heard this grunting, chuffing sound in the background, and I turned and there was a bear approaching. And I've just learned not to take bears on the ground. And so I hightailed it up to a platform, and unfortunately the bear killed the hostage. And I was like, well, that didn't work out well. And then on another occasion, I actually had a flamethrower that I had picked up. And I noticed again another person who was a hostage, and I came down. I've got a customized weapon, a 44 Magnum now, which again, never spent time before really with customized weapons, and I took some people out, and then used my flamethrower to take down the last few, also kill a wolf, also kill a mountain lion. So, it's just been really awesome. It's always been awesome flying helicopters around, and I'm having the same fun that I had on it back in 2018, except now I'm doing it on an ultra wide monitor and on PC. So, it's been a ton of fun. I've also been playing Halo Infinite, and a few weeks ago I talked about playing Halo Infinite and the disappointment of playing it now that I've completed all of the battle passes and the winter pass and the winter pass plus thing in the events. But this week I kind of settled down into a certain quiet in terms of it's really enjoyable just now to play that multiplayer arena style combat and not have to be worried about a battle pass or skins or anything like that I'm chasing. I've come.
Whoa. You're just playing a game because it's fun and not because there's a treadmill attached to it? What? What kind of gamer are you?
As I have said, right? Like, look, guys. Look, the battle passes and all that's great. It's an extra piece of cheese. It's a breadcrumb trail for you to follow. But like your first and primary approach on any of these games should be the game should be fun. And in Halo Infinite, I've just come around to. Go back a year or two ago, I would have definitely said Destiny 2 has the absolute best gunplay, but, gunplay, melee, overall physics model, I think Halo Infinite has the edge on Destiny 2. Now, Destiny 2 has wider variation with the multiple classes, and I get that, but as far as just a pure shooter goes, I'm gonna go with Halo Infinite for now, and it's just really like, and on a night, and of course the other difference is I play PvP on Halo Infinite. I do not play Crucible on Destiny 2, but on a night that I go in and play PvP and do well, I don't know that there's anything more of an ego buff, than that, than walking away and doing well and having a high KDA. It's just it's way better than Call of Duty is right now, despite all the problems that Halo Infinite has. And so, the problem is this week, obviously after the layoffs and after the bad numbers that kind of came out on Xbox, obviously the problem is and the worry, right, is what happens with Halo Infinite now. And so supposedly season 3 is still on track. And so it'll be nice to get the next battle pass and to see what's coming down the pike. But I'm just, for right now, I'm just going to continue playing it as long as I can and as long as it's supported, and we'll see what happens with it from there. And again, also playing it on that ultra wide monitor now, and again, being able to like sit in a spot and just see like the entirety of the map down the multiple fire lanes is just it's just great, just super. Swiss, you have been playing a game that I played on PC. I think I also have this on the console, but I'm very interested to hear, because have you played the regular version of this game, and is this your second approach to it?
Yeah, I played the original Death Stranding on the PS4. Got through a first or second chapter on that, and then by the time I came back, they had announced the director's cut. So I waited and got the PS5 version of the director's cut and started going back into that. And I've played through what I had already completed, and I'm into some new content as well. But there were already a few things that I was like, I don't remember that. I don't remember that. And they were like, they made life better. Like, I don't remember if the mazer gun was in the first one or if I just didn't do the mission to get it at the time or something. But being able to like just zap the mules has been helpful. But no, I don't know, like for a game as kind of esoteric as Death Stranding is, like I just like it. It's I bought into the gimmick, like the whole idea with like the, you're on your own, but you're not on your own, and like everybody else is a porter, and like when I booted, like in the opening area, there's like three or four like city areas, like one primary city and then some satellite areas, and there's a place where the roads kind of make a like tee off of each other. So it's kind of like the central nexus, like just outside of mule territory. And me on my motorbike thing, driving around, I was running out of juice, so I put up a charging station right at that nexus. And so as I was going around, I drove right through my charging station. I can keep going. And that charging station is propagated in other people's games. So like when I come in and then I see like 15 people used your charging station or something, and it's just like, it doesn't really matter. Like, and there's stuff all over the map. Like I use other people's like ladders and everything, but it still kind of feels, I don't know. Like, I don't know why like that feels good. It's 2023. It's not a big deal for people to like interconnect on video games, but just the separation, but also like just like the tangential like interactions with other people has been enjoyable. And I like I like the whole, the way he presented it is like, we're trying, like I want to, like the whole game is about bringing people together. And every time you go to like a city, like they're always like, man, you're awesome, thanks for helping. And it's just like, wow, this game's upbeat, even though it's like post-apocalyptic. Like I like the people here, and and I like being a good guy trying to help people out by delivering their packages or whatever. So it's just, I don't know. I don't know why it works so well, but it does for me.
Oh, that's awesome. I feel much the same way about Death Stranding, and there's a lot of similarities in kind of, you part of the game is you have to decide how you're going to go about it, and you have to decide how you're going to spend your time, in very much the same way as Far Cry 5. So yeah, it's an awesome experience. Good to hear that you're playing it on the PlayStation 5 and having a good time. DBQ, any other questions or comments on any of the games that we did the rundown on?
No, I appreciate Swiss. It's nice to have you here. I'm glad to hear a little bit about your gaming experiences. I still have not played a little bit of Death Stranding, so always interesting. But I'm glad that you are here to join us tonight. So thank you.
Be back soon, probably.
That is great to hear. Already in the month of January, this crew has probably touched more new games so far this year than we ever have before. Multiple cast members have played Fire Emblem. Need for Speed Unbound is not technically a 2023 release, but it just came out in January. Spent time with DBQ. Spent time with Forspoken and HiFi Rush. I have a feeling that Talmaster may have also put his hands on HiFi Rush. I've played Knights of Honor 2 Sovereign and also touched Fire Emblem Engage. So we will see if we continue that trend as we turn the corner into February. Next week, Talmaster will be your host, and DBQ and I will be on the 2s and 3s, backing him up. Until next time, stay safe out there. Take care of yourselves. Play the games that you like. Come here to talk about the games that you love. For anybody who happened to swing through the live stream, we appreciate you. For anybody who happens to watch the archive version of this episode on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube, please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel so then you can just receive a notification whenever we post a new episode. Until next week, good night, good luck, and good gaming. That's going to do it for us. We're out of here.